Hello, everyone. My name is Meng. But first of all, what's up with the Western music here? I was expecting some Hungarian music in the background. Really? So, who am I? And what are we talking about tonight? We're going to talk about iOS prototyping. First of all, how many of you are designers here? Show hand. Okay, that's a fair amount. And how many are developers? Wow, you guys are outnumbered. That's crazy. Just a little warning: don't kill each other. I know you guys have a lot of feud going on. My goal, actually, as a designer and slash coder, is to really bring the community together and for you to work better together as a team. That's, to me, the end goal. And I definitely wish for that to happen, even if it is to inform each of the parties about the way that each other work. I think I would have done my job here. So let's get started. I'm going to talk a little bit about who I am. So I'm a traveling designer. I started designing about 14 years ago. And I quickly, because back then, during the time of the web, you were either a designer or a developer, and it was very, very fragmented. Today, it's a very different story. But I know back then, though, engineers used to be paid way more than a designer, right? And that's exactly why, I wanted to follow the money, like everyone. I think it's so that's exactly why I decided to learn how to code, is because why should I be doing design if they're just gonna pay like, a dime of what compared to a coder? So that's why I decided to learn coding. Even though it wasn't like my first passion, I learned how to work with code. I learned how to build website using PHP and MySQL. I learned how to build a product holistically. And at the end of the day, I feel like with what I've learned, I noticed that engineering, just as marketing, just as building websites and talking to your customers, all of this fall under the umbrella of design, right? And I think it's important to understand that, because we're building products for people, and we want them to enjoy the products that we build. So that's why I'm so passionate about the two. And that's why I feel like if we work together better as a team, we're gonna achieve better results. So yeah, I'm just a designer from Canada, and it's like 3,000 miles, and Gabber invited me here, and I was like kind of wondering what's the attendance rate is gonna be, but I thought, usually in San Francisco we have like 200 people who sign up, and then there were like 50 people who showed up. And that was like hugely disappointing. But here we got 100 people sign up and 100 people showing up. So I don't know what's going on here. Maybe it's about the pizzas. But it's really cool. I'm really humbled. Thank you so much. So I think what's bringing us together as designers and developers is that there's this huge wave going on in the community, which is about prototyping. What is prototyping, right? Why do people prototype nowadays? Why is this a new thing? Well, a little bit ago, like iOS 7 came, and iOS 7, and just like iOS 8, is like a huge change in the design community. Everything got a lot simpler. So what we used to do back then was this hugely detailed kind of skeuomorphic design where, if you're an engineer and I was to ask you, hey, try to do this, and you could be like, fuck you, man, that's not gonna happen. So yeah, it's really complicated. And believe it or not, this is what got me a job in San Francisco. So it was huge back then. It's a huge thing back then to stitch letters and make logins and kill cows and stuff like that. But things have changed for the better, I think. So, we had Photoshop, and we. Okay. So I was saying, you know, back then we used to do really, really complicated markups and designs. And, you know, because it was so complicated, it took a lot of our time as designers. We used to have to deal with like tons of layers in our Photoshop file. And we used to have like really crazy textures and like lighting effects and photo editing. So all of that happened in an application like Photoshop. And thankfully, you know, we're designing for 2014 now. And this skeuomorphic design has kind of fade away in time, and it's gonna be even more apparent in the coming years that this is not the future. I mean, the reason why skeuomorphic design existed back then is because the crowd was so limited to people who has grown into technology. But nowadays, people, you know, a lot of people, their first computer is their phone. You know, their first user interface exists on a phone, and a lot of teenagers nowadays, they grow without these notions of, you know, a leathered calendar, right? They didn't grow into this world where you can make these kind of assumptions in design where, you know, if you're gonna design for familiarity, well, the familiarity and the analogy has to make sense. But nowadays, it doesn't make sense anymore, and that's why we don't need to do skeuomorphic design anymore. So we designers, because we don't have to do skeuomorphic designs, we have a lot more time to spend on other facets of design, such as, animations. We're talking about colors, typography, transitional interfaces, and I think it's great because we're kind of going back to where print is, and I think the simplicity and the beauty of print is where we are at today. We don't have so much Chrome in the user interface anymore. So what's happening? What tool should we use today to welcome this new era of design? Well, the tool that I've been using for about 2.5 years is called Sketch. And what is Sketch? Well, Sketch is a completely vector-based design tool that allows you to do, very quickly a mock-up for a mobile interface using multiple screens, and it allows you to preview on your phone right outside the box, and it allows you to export assets right outside the box with for multiple resolution very, very quickly. So I think it's important to understand that the way that we design today has to change. We shouldn't focus anymore on photo editing, on 3D, on stitching letters anymore. We should be focusing on designing multiple screens and on building like a holistic interface, something that feels like you can quickly get the markup to your screen as quickly as possible. Something that if you were to ask a designer or an engineer to come in and look at this interface, and they will be like, okay, I can actually learn this. It's really not that complicated because everything that you see here is pretty, it's not alien to someone who's been using Xcode, for example, because Sketch uses an OS X interface. It has the toolbar, it has the inspector, it has the layers, and it has multiple screens, which, if you've been using storyboards a little bit in Xcode, you should be familiar with the way these kind of portions work and how they come together. So that's my workflow now as a designer. And I believe it's important that we understand that we're trying to make things more efficient, and we're using simpler tools so that we can do more and then we can collaborate better. And we're no longer in that age where we can we can afford to separate the two things. We should more merge the two and allow better collaborations. We're designing for devices primarily, so Android and iOS, and we need a tool, just like the Mac, we need a tool that is ready outside the box. It shouldn't be something that you download and then suddenly you have to find all of these hidden plugins, like the way that Windows still work. You download Windows and you have to find all of these kind of like applications in order to fit your workflow. With Sketch, it's the same way as the Mac, where everything outside the box is going to work just the way as it should, and you should be immediately allowed to build that application that you dream of building from scratch, and to your phone as quickly as possible. And recently we have the iPhone 6, and we used to have just 1x and 2x. Now we have to build for 3x now. And a funny story, 3x happened even before the iPhone 6 came. And in Sketch 3.0, for example, they have allowed for you to export multiple resolution right from the get-go. And I think that's really important to understand, is that the way that Sketch has been built is that it's kind of preparing you for the future. And even like if you have like a giant phone in the future, you can basically be prepared for that. So let's talk a little bit about animations, because I think this is a topic where a lot of us feel like, well, this is taking a lot of time, and for good reason. We didn't used to do a lot of animations like 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, right? I'm sorry? We were using Flash, of course, but only a very small subset of designers were doing that, and especially not coders. Or at least I haven't heard a lot of most people, I would say, were using HTML and a little bit of CSS and very ugly HTML back in the day, right? And the notions of doing animations were extremely kind of like either you do Flash or either you do like HTML, which was very static. Nowadays, it feels like animations is very much part of design. It's very present because material design and iOS8 really encourage you to do transitional interface. And a transitional interface is kind of like having one screen jumping to another in the most seamless way possible, in the most natural way possible, so that it feels like a natural progression. And so we want better animations. We no longer can afford an interface where you have to wait for 2 seconds for one screen to jump from one to another. I mean, why people scratch their head when they use a website, especially a website that is not modern? Well, because it's so hard to use. It's so confusing to jump from one screen that is completely different from the second screen. And therefore, we do want better animations. And iOS 8, just as material design, encourage you to use this, to use this metaphor. And documentation, thankfully, are being replaced by prototype. Why should a designer work 30 minutes or like 5 hours or even 2 weeks on documentation, which is something that they're not trained for? We're not writers. We're not, we don't want to do 20 pages explaining what the design is about. What we should be spending that time for is to simply prototype it and then show it to someone as quickly as possible, so that when we receive the feedback, we're immediately informed about how we should be designing. So that's what prototype is all about. The cost of making an app has never been this low. And it's never been this quick to make an app. And if this is the segue for designers to start learning code, then I think prototyping is the perfect, kind of transition. Because at the end of the day, we want better products. We want to build something more efficiently, and we want to get our products in the hands of people as quickly as possible. So let's talk a little bit about the prototyping tools that's out there. Because, of course, there's a lot of UX designers here, right? And a lot of UX designers will probably never touch code, and that's fine. But I think that if you're not going to touch code, then it's still good to be aware of prototyping, such as learning how to use Flinto or Pixate, for example. So Flinto allow you to very quickly drag and drop the screens in the interface, and you can just like connect each of the screen using the stock iOS transitions between the screens. So that's really easy. Anyone can use this, and anyone can basically build like a completely flow for your app in about 5 minutes. So this is great, and at least if you're not going to code, you can use something. It's a bit limited, but at least you show it to someone, and that person can kind of have a feel of what the final app should look like and how it should feel. And they can just start tapping on the screen and see, if there's anything wrong in the flow, which I think on an overview level, I think is very important. And therefore, the feedback that you get are super realistic. And then you can definitely use that feedback instead of saying, hey, I don't like red. I think that's not very informative as to how you should be designing, right? It should be more like, hey, I don't understand this screen, or why is this going from here to here? Like, it's very confusing. So having something that is as close as the final product as possible, I think is extremely useful in the way that we design. And then there's animations. And again, we don't have to use code. With Pixate, you can just like drag and drop a bunch of assets, such as the dialogue and the background, and you can decide that the dialogue here like is draggable, for example, that you can drag it down and then it goes to the second screen, for example. You can decide that if you click on the dialogue, then it's going to expand to the second screen using like a custom transition, a transitional interface. So, again, without using code, you can literally prototype the best animations you can. And you don't need to understand as much, at least, about all the technicality that that engineers work. But of course, I definitely recommend you to learn code, because there are new softwares that are really gaining a lot of momentum, such as Framer, which allows you to use kind of like a web framework, web for coding. And with that, something that is like using CoffeeScript, you can basically see the result of your prototype in real time on the right side. Now, the beauty of the new coding frameworks and the new kind of emergence of new code like Swift is that it's far more approachable. So if you think about developers, now that a lot of you want to learn design, and I don't need to ask you, because I've been getting a lot of feedback from a lot of you, and I've done a lot of talk where the room is just full of developers, and they told me I really wanted to learn design, and I think that's great, because design has become so easy to learn nowadays, and design has become so simple to learn nowadays. Well, vice versa, coding is also becoming easier to learn, because back in the day, if you were to build an app, you would have to literally like code everything, build the app, wait about and then go through the flow each time, and that was really chaotic. And you cannot ask a designer to come in and start kind of playing with Xcode and see how the UI shows up in the iOS simulator. But nowadays you have something like Framer or the iOS simulator and Swift Playground, which allows you to come in and say, hey, I want to change this color, or I want to start drawing and placing this square, and then you have the result in real time, which is, by the way, something that has been happening for quite a while on the web. We just need to be able to transition that same kind of mindset into iOS. So why do we code? That's a good question. Why do we need to code? Well, because I think the tools or the GUI, like Framework or Pixade or all of these kind of like non-code centric tools, they're still extremely limited. You will not be able to create a final app with these tools, unfortunately. And you will not be able to understand how you engineer work, so that the collaboration is not really kind of improving as drastically as it should be, like it should happen on the web right now. The reason why we code is to take our design to the next level, meaning that, if we can start like using interactions, like if we click on a button and we want to go to another screen and we want to change the text, or if we want to, like do a parallax effect or something like that. Well, you can't do that using storyboard, for example. You need something that is less constrained, basically. And that's kind of like where I'm gonna be. This is where I'm really passionate about learning, which is I want to learn prototyping, but also I want to learn prototyping so that I can eventually build the real app. And if you can build a real app using the real language, using the real tool that is used to making app, then you have kind of like a window into how engineers work. And it's like, for designers, web designers, we've been doing that for a while. We've been doing CSS, so CSS is kind of code, and JavaScript, is code. So a lot of designers are happy to do that. We're happy to do HTML and CSS and a little bit of CoffeeScript and JavaScript. So we can code a little bit. We don't need to be experts like engineers. And by doing that, we're actually able to understand better the work of an engineer, allowing us to have more empathy and, and work better with them. And therefore, we can build products faster. So in the case of iOS, there's this tool that I find amazing, and that, I know a lot of developers, they kind of snob this tool for a while. It's called Storyboard. And the way that Storyboard works, and it has improved a lot over the years, by the way. I know that, I'm not talking about storyboards like 3 years ago. I think today storyboards is a lot better than it used to be. For a designer coming in and using Xcode, goes to the assets catalog, can literally change the assets as they want. They don't need to nag the developer anymore and say, hey, I want you to change this this little icon. It's not 1 pixel perfect. So, of course, they're gonna get a lot of developers saying, no, man, you have to wait for next week or something. So that's a huge problem. And we cannot afford that. If you're building a product, it has to be as real-time, it has to be as collaborative as possible. We cannot afford these little delays. And I know that maybe for developers it's not as important, but for designers it's extremely important. Some of them will cry if it's not pixel perfect to the way that they wish. So, I guess it's important to understand that we try to kind of have more compassion towards each other so that we can work better. So, a tool like Storyboard, to me, is like a segue between the two worlds, where I can draw the interface, I can drop a bunch of components, and I can do the pixel perfection. I can replace the assets myself. I can even, if I was to learn this, I could even learn auto layout, which I know a lot of you bitch about. Even the most experienced developers haven't mastered auto layout yet. And to me, it's simple. Why? It's because it's still about the layout, which is something that designers have been doing for a number of years. We love doing layout. Why shouldn't we do that? So if a designer was to learn Storyboard, I think it would be extremely interesting to the way that iOS engineers and iOS designers collaborate. So there's Swift. And you know, when I talk to a designer and I'm like, hey, try to learn Objective-C, they're like, fuck you, man. I don't want to learn this shit. So it's a very bulky language, because we designers, we're used to CSS. We're used to CoffeeScript for some. We're used to very simple wording, and it has to be as explanatory as possible. So Apple kind of came up with this framework, which came as a surprise to everyone, called Swift. And believe it or not, I you know, I have a lot of designers friends, and they came to me and like, hey, I want to learn Swift. You know, they're like super excited, like, what the fuck? You know, this is a programming language. Why are you so excited about this? But that's amazing. And we should definitely take this kind of like passion. We should take this newfound interest and use it to use it as a tool for us to collaborate better as a community. But you know, like a few days ago, I wrote an article that was titled "Designers Code Differently," and I want to tell you a little bit about why I'm so passionate about this topic, because the way that developers code is very much about arrays and, you know, like very complex logics. But the way that designers want to work with code is like CSS, which is just like, I want to change this damn color. How do I do that? So, you know, when I set out to write my Swift course for designers, and please don't laugh at me, you know, I knew that I couldn't say, hey, I'm gonna teach you guys how to do these crazy algorithms. Like, I'm just really bad at that. I mean, I cannot even master the way that I describe the function, the methods, and all that stuff. But I can say one thing, is that I can explain to you how to draw rectangles and how to place, you know, a bunch of squares. I can definitely tell you how to animate, which is something that I know a lot of developers haven't even touched yet. So we designers, we want to code differently, and we want to own a different part of the iOS development. We want to own the UI part, and we want to own the animation part. So the way that we're going to come in is simply like, you know, just trying to understand how do we change certain things so that the result can be shown right away in real time. So Swift Playground is something amazing for that. And Framer, for example, is also pretty amazing. And the other way around can happen as well. Developers can design. Not in the same way as designers, of course. You know, they're not going to do skeuomorphic designs from one day to another. They cannot, you know, start a design from scratch. Probably not, at least not from a day one. But they can definitely open the design and say, hey, let's say my designer is not here. He's not able to respond, which surprisingly happens a lot. You know, I can just open his design and I can just export this asset or change this little color. And you know, and of course, you know, because Sketch use autosave, just make sure to have your own copy so that you know you don't replace the changes, because the designer is gonna curse at you the next day. But yeah, developers can definitely learn a little bit about design. You know, and I'm not just saying about the tools, about Sketch. I'm definitely also saying about the whole experience of designing something that is successful, that makes sense to the users. Because I like to believe that both are doing design. You know, even code, engineering, design, marketing, all of that is building a product, and it has to be holistic. So we're building for the customer, and if a customer asks for something, we have to make the change. It doesn't matter who you are. And yeah, you know, it's really important. So we want to collaborate better. And we want to ship faster than anyone. Because the big problem today is that For iOS, it takes way too long to get an app out. It can take like 3 months in general to make an app and get it out in the market, which is way too long. Because if you think about websites, we have matured for a very long time. And nowadays, we can literally make a website in a few days. Why can't that happen in the iOS world? Why is it that designers are so out of the picture in the iOS world? And there was a quote that I wrote on my design article. I was saying developers are becoming better collaborators. They're just waiting for designers to do the same. And what do I mean by that, right? What do I mean by that? Well, developers are becoming more UI-centric by the day. They used to be very much focused on the back end and stuff like that. But nowadays, they have to take care of the animations because the designer is not going to come in Xcode and start animating that shit. So the developers have to do the UI. They have to take care of your assets. They have to they have to do the pixel perfection for you because you're not even going to come in the application and change that. So developers are definitely there. They understand design because they've been doing that for a while now because designers are so out of the picture. So developers are waiting for designers for them to learn a little bit about, about UI in Xcode. Why shouldn't that happen? If that was the were to happen, then we would be better teams. So that's what I meant, and I think it's really important to understand. So, with this talk, I want to start with the demo using Sketch. So, of course, some of you are extremely familiar with Sketch, and of course, this is not usually like what I do is like I do a 6 hours Sketch workshop and then a 6 hours Swift workshop. But today, I have to fit all of that in basically 2 hours. So it's going to be very fast, and for developers, the Sketch part is going to seem very fast, and then for designers, the Swift part is going to seem very fast. But hopefully, this is going to paint kind of like a picture as to how each of the world work. At least not from like an expert perspective, but it will inform you how to be a better collaborator at the end of the day. So let's start with Sketch. Do we have a microphone that can hold, or can I just? I guess I have to hold it.
Does it fit there?
Trying to hack something. Hello? I think it should be like this way, for example. So just put it this way. That's the power of the hacking. Hello? Hello? Yeah. Hello? Okay, so we have something working. So let's open Sketch. And this is a new document. So, as I was saying, Sketch is very much it should have like a very familiar UI, right? You know, if you open a lot of Mac OS application, you could see this toolbar that you can change, and you can have like amazing options such as make grid or the colors option. Everything is using the kind of guideline for the Mac. And I think that's great because if we are to switch between applications like Xcode and Sketch, and if it's completely foreign like Photoshop, then it's not very productive. And for people who are new to these tools, it would be extremely hard to learn. And then we have the layers on the left side, the pages. We have the inspector. And if you do an insert of an artboard, you can have a bunch of preset templates, such as the iPhone screen, landscape and portrait, the iPad screens. Even for web, it works. So this is what I meant for about, you know, having kind of like the Mac of design tools, is that everything outside the box, after you download it, is available to you. You don't need to find all of these plugins just for web designers or just for iOS designers. It's already there. So let's do an iPhone screen. So you would have something like, you know, an artboard. In Sketch, it's called an artboard. I think I really love the concept of artboards because this shows perfectly how designers should be working today. Because today, we're designing multiple screens. We're designing multiple interactions within one screen. So Sketch is made perfectly for that. And I can just, if I want, I can use the pages. So the way that I use artboards and pages is that I would have like, you know, multiple interactions for one page, and then I would have like a completely different page or section as another page. So for example, here I can say this is the home page, and the next one I want it to be the login. And inside the home, I can just decide. Hello? Okay. Hello? Okay. Cool. There you go. Okay. Thank you. This is much better. So as I was saying, the artboard can be used for multiple interactions, and I can add as many artboards as I want. You have a new message.
Sorry.
No problem. You can add as many artboards as you want, and you can design them side by side. I can even decide that, you know, the next artboard is going to be for the iPhone 6 or for the iPhone 6 Plus, for example. And I can kind of compare them side by side. In Photoshop, this would be extremely complicated to do because you would have to organize everything and kind of learn the rope about how to organize your document in Photoshop. Most often, about 3 years ago, when I was working with Photoshop, I had so many Photoshop documents. Nowadays, I can just have one document and it would represent my whole app. And I think that's incredibly efficient. So, you know, this is kind of like a course that I'm doing. So we're going to be making this app here. It has the main screen. It has multiple interactions. And it has a custom transition between these screens. So we're going to try to do that very quickly, obviously. I want to show you, by doing this, it's not to show you like what is the kind of like the template to design, right? This is not about that. I just want to show you the features of Sketch as I'm building this design. So for example, in Sketch, it has the smart guides, which is insanely useful. It even has distances. So if I press on Alt, I can see the distances between all the elements. I can also decide to use the inspector here, which I think is something that I like to do a lot because I like to be precise in my work. I can use the keyboard arrow to increase and the shift arrow to increase by 10. I can even do multiplication, for example, divided by 2, multiple by 2. So these are some really neat, hidden features that I think is going to really help in your workflow. If I draw a rectangle, I'm using keyboard shortcut to be a little bit faster. This is something that you're going to learn over time as you get more comfortable with the tool, is that every of these tools can be used with a keyboard shortcut. In the case of the rectangle, it's simply for R. So I draw a rectangle, and it has a bunch of kind of values that I can change. It has the blending mode, just like Photoshop. It has colors. It has, a very easy to access colors. So in Photoshop, for example, you have to go to styles, and then, you have to kind of explore all of these global light and inner shadow, really complex stuff that like 90% of that stuff you don't even need. Where in Sketch, you can just very directly just change the color that you want, change the hue, the saturation, the brightness. I like to use this a lot, as well as the opacity. So this palette here is kind of like the automatic palette, where it's going to show you all the colors that you've been using in this document. And then you have the custom palette where you can just, add new ones. And then I want to show you something cool, which is something that you can do in iOS. It's the background blur. I can make it 20. And this is actually a dynamic layer, like in iOS. Just to show you that it is dynamic, I can drag it, and you can see that this is not something that where traditionally I had to say, well, I'm going to merge this bunch of layers, and I'm going to apply a blur. In Sketch, it's completely dynamic, just like in iOS. A very, very neat tool that I use very often, because in iOS is a very commonly way, like it's a very common way to kind of set the the context for the background and make the front content very readable, very kind of front and center. So by blurring something dynamically, I can really quickly, replicate that effects that I can do in iOS. Then I can just draw a shape and then, very quickly center it, show my distances. I love rounded corners, so I'm going to do that. Can change the background. Or I can quickly just set like an off-white, which we designers love to do a lot. And then, very simply, drag more layers, set this, or using the key arrows. Now, where's my rounded corners? Well, let's do the masking now. There you go. With just like 4 layers, I already have something that is a very simple interface that has kind of a pretty decent structure where I'm focusing on what is in front of me. I can focus on what is the most important content inside my UI, which is the photo, the title, the dialogue, for example. And then I can, do more stuff. Repeating the same steps. And applying the background blur. Using the T, I'm going to create a typeface. And I can go directly to my typeface. It's very direct. You don't have to set your workspace, like in Photoshop, for example. And you can search for your typeface. A lot of you might be very familiar with iOS design, so you know that typography is extremely important, and it has to be extremely readable. It's not like the web 10 years ago where text used to be like 10 pixels and it's barely readable. Nowadays, for iOS, the minimum size is about 22 pixels, and the most recommended size is about 32 pixels. For titles, I like to go between 40 to 50. Could just center it. And again, using distances, I can perfectly align my elements. I can duplicate it just like Photoshop. Quickly change the opacity. So, very, very quickly, I have an interface here. And then I can just use my icons. So most of us designers, and this is actually a good news for you developers, is that we don't draw those icons from scratch. So you don't need to draw those icons from scratch. You can just literally use any set of icons and use it in your interface. To me, icon design is kind of like an art form in itself. So I can decide to paste right away like this, and it would be paste centered. But I can also decide to paste it right where my position is. So using Shift, Command, and V, I can paste it right, to the bug interface, to the bug text there. I can use the command key. See, this color was automatically detected from this icon. Small detail, but you would be surprised as to how much time you can save with such a feature. And of course, if I wanted to, I can just decide that I want to use the eyedrop tool to get a color, or I can get it outside of my app, somewhere else, which surprisingly is not possible in Photoshop. And just like that, I can also do a grouping. Sketch will automatically name your layers based on the name of your layers. I mean the folders based on the name of your layers. I can just duplicate them very quickly. I can also use rulers. So Command R is going to open the rulers. My goal here is to center these two layers. First of all, I want to divide the interface in two, so I can center it within one half of it. So I'm going to create the guide first. So now I can kind of like try to center it. And you can use command and the curly sign to switch between different windows very quickly. And if I want to paste that icon, I can just do Command Shift and V right at the position of my auto icon. Very small detail, but very time saving. It's important to have the same baseline. So that's my sketch file. And like I said, like I mentioned earlier, I can completely zoom in at as many levels that I want. It's completely vector, so at any resolution, it's going to be perfect. In this case, I decided to show the pixels, but I can hide it to make it vector. If I want to see the pixels, I can just do so. And when you have something that is completely vector-based, you can do really amazing things. So you can decide to kind of resize it as much as you want. In Photoshop, you would have to kind of have either the bitmap type of UI or you have the vector type, but you have to know how to do a vector. And so if you have like a set of icons, or a set of templates, you can open them. In Sketch, you have a bunch of templates that comes with the application. So if I wanted to design an UI, I can open the template that comes with Sketch. I can go to the pages. I can have a bunch of symbols. In this case, I want to get the status bar that comes with iOS. I can just go to this symbol, copy, and paste it right here. Everything is vector-based, so that is extremely useful. So let's draw that little menu on the top right. But now, of course, when I draw this here, my mask is automatically applied. In order to cancel that, I can either ignore the mask, or I can just make a folder out of all of this, which to me, I think is the best method. As you know, in iOS, the button size should be around 88 pixels. Let's create the border. I'm gonna try to go as quickly as I can. Like I said, there's a lot of content for this amount of time. I wish there was like a fast forward. So I want to create a menu, and first of all, I'm gonna draw like a rectangle first. But you know, with most popover, it needs kind of like an arrow pointing up. So let's do that. We need to rotate it by 45 degrees. And we have something like this, and we want some rounded corners. But now, let's say I want to add some type of gradient on it, and another gradient here. Well, as you can see, it's not perfect. So how do we solve that? In order to solve that, all you need to do is a little bit like icon design. It's just to combine a bunch of shapes together in order to create a new shape by just dragging and dropping one shape into another. And now the two of them become one single shape. And because we can do that, now we can apply our gradient without this disconnect between the two. So I'm not going to finish this here, but I just want to show you a little bit about symbols. Let me organize my layers first. I'm going to put these two together. I know you guys are excited to get some more pizzas. Let me just finish this. So you know, you have the home screen, and you want to create some symbols. Why do we need symbols? Because when you create multiple interactions, you don't want to recreate the same kind of main interface from scratch every single time. So of course we can just do like hide and show all the time, but that's not very optimal. The other solution is to have a symbol for each of these folders so that they can be reusable. So let's, you know, I can duplicate my artboard just as I can duplicate my layers, and I'm going to do that. Now, if I change something, so let's say I don't want this here, and if I want to change my title, it's going to automatically change inside the other artboard. So that's really efficient. And when you use symbols, you can literally make so many screens together very quickly. So that's a little bit of preview of Sketch, and you know, in about 10-15 minutes, I was able to create this interface very quickly. And you know, I'm going to show you a little bit more a few more techniques after the break, but hope you enjoy it and have a good pizza. Thank you. All right, guys, welcome back. I can already see there are less people, and Gabber, I told you they came for the pizza. It's fine. I just want to show you a couple of things about Sketch, especially the exporting feature, and also how to preview on your phone. Using the Connect tool with the Sketch Mirror app, you can see in real time the changes for multiple artboards. And you can switch between the pages. So that's really useful to see how it looks like on your device. The second thing that I want to talk about is that Sketch has a bunch of plugins. We have a very vibrant community that creates amazing plugins. And one of my favorite plugins, for example, is called Sketch Measure. And this is really useful, especially if you want to communicate like the margins and the size. So with a bunch of clicks, you can see the size of your design elements. I can see the distances and the padding with just a few clicks. I can even show the properties of elements. Such as the font, the typeface. So it's going to give me all this information that I can just give to my developer. If that person is unfortunate enough for not having a designer that does the storyboard for you. So I'm going to show you another plugin as well, which I find really cool. So typically you have a design like this, and you have some text. And then you have the city. And then if you put this together, you can do a bunch of duplications. So I can make this into 5 rows instead, like this. And I can decide to select all of these, and I would use the content generator to do something like this. So very, very time-saving. I can even do the same for names. As well as the city. We don't have Budapest, unfortunately, or Hungary. So something like this. And in a matter of minutes, I already have something that we designers do all the time without having to find all of these avatars ourselves. So that's really useful. So now I want to talk about assets, because that's extremely important. If you're not doing your assets, you're not doing a good job as a designer. So I'm designing right now in 2x, and I can export the in ping files. That's the accepted file type for iOS. And I can decide that I'm going to export at 0.5x because I'm designing in 2x. And then for the 2x, I'm going to export at 1x scale. I can even decide to do at 1.5 for 3x. Or as much as I want, right? And when I do that, I can just export it to my desktop, for example. I think it's taking a lot of time to do that 300. Oh no. So, because we're working with vector, I can literally export at any resolution that I want. And there you go, we have the 3000x, 300x, which is going to crash my computer. Hopefully our computers in the future is going to be better than this one. So that's about export. Some cool things about Sketch, for example, I really like that I can drag and drop stuff like this one, and then it automatically creates an image. So I can just drag and drop this guy here. Actually, it has to be here, but I can decide to do the canvas. It creates the preview right away, and I can just drag and drop it really easily. Now, a new thing, very new, just happened this year, is that you can actually use one asset file. This only works for iOS 7 and 8, unfortunately. But you can decide to export in PDF. So unfortunately, I can't see it. So I'm going to change the color. Now, you have to talk to your developer first about this method, but it's fairly new. I think it's the future in the sense that new apps are going to be kind of resolution independent. Nowadays, developers do use Paint code, for example. They're going to use PDF as well. So the usefulness of this is that you can just export one single asset, and it's going to render those assets automatically in multiple resolution for you, because it's a vector file. All right, so we have, kind of like the basics of Sketch. Obviously, you can do a lot more stuff than that. There are a lot of articles about Sketch nowadays. You can definitely look up for resources. We have about 20 minutes to cover Swift. I'm going to go very fast, unfortunately. So I want to at least show you how to use storyboards. Nope. So typically when you open Xcode, you're going to be greeted with this screen here. You can decide to play with Playground. I can't cover that today. But then there's the second one, which is allowing you to create a new Xcode project. You click on that, and you just start with a single view application. I'm going to name that My App. Put your organization, the identifier, which is basically like a domain name, for example. Use a Swift. I'm going to name something else. So that's the interface of Xcode. I know it's kind of overwhelming at first. This is why I'm here. I'm going to kind of tell you kind of your way in so that you understand how to use storyboard, and from storyboard it should be simple enough for any designer to kind of adventure in. The first thing that you need to understand is about assets. Now, assets is a big topic, and if you're a designer and you can kind of open the Xcode project and just look at the assets and be able to replace those assets for your engineer, you're going to save a tremendous amount of communication and work already. So you open Xcode, you know, let's say I have a bunch of assets. Like this. They automatically pair the different resolutions. And I can just replace these assets just, you know, any way I want. I can do the app icon. Drag that until I see this gray square. And there you go, I have my app icon set up. Now let's do a bit of a storyboard. So let me explain a little bit about the Xcode interface. So we have the navigator, the toolbar, and the inspectors. And I can decide to hide each of these. So in this case, I'm not going to need the navigator anymore. And I'm gonna look at my storyboard. So one very interesting topic, which all of you are going to be facing in the near future, is how to make your app adaptive to multiple screens. This is something that we didn't have to care about before, but now with the iPhone 5, the iPhone 6 and 6 Plus, you know, we have to care about these things. Of course, I don't have enough time to cover this, but you would have to essentially use auto layout, which is something I'm going to come back to. First, I want you guys to be familiar with the UI. So I'm going to go here, and I'm going to disable auto layout for now. And when you disable auto layout, it's just going to be custom to, you know, the iPhone 5 as a default. So I have my view controller, which is essentially an artboard or a page, and then I have a bunch of layers here. Then on the right side, I have a bunch of inspectors. So we don't have only one inspector, unfortunately, which is good and bad. Good because you have a ton of options that you can play with. Bad because for someone new, it might be a little bit overwhelming. The most important ones that you should use is the attribute inspector, which if you like draw a square, for example, you can change the background, for example, right? And just like Sketch, I can go to the size inspector. I can set the size of my elements. So something like this, right? So those two are the most important ones. This one is for the size and even the auto layout. And then this one for the different properties such as alpha, background color, the tint. And depending on which component that you're using, it's going to have a different value. Let me talk a little bit about the components library. So we have the view controllers. And then we have a bunch of elements that you should be pretty familiar with, such as label, which is the text, buttons, text field. We have the image, and then we have the UI view. The UI view is like your rectangle. You can do anything with it. And then you also have your images, right? The images are directly from your assets library, and I can look at all of them here, and I can decide to drag and drop them to my interface. So let's do a quick prototype. I'm just going to import all of my screens. And just like that, it went into my assets library. And I'm just going to drag and drop here. There you go. I have my screen right here. I can double click, and I can add more view controllers. To show the different interactions and the different pages. And I can just drag and drop my images. So this UI should be very familiar if you work with Meng To, if you work with InVision or Marvel app. Now, all there is left to do is to create the transition between the screens, right? If I click on a button, I want something to happen. So let's do that. So I have my button here. I'm just going to remove the text. I can duplicate the element just so that you can see the buttons. Even though they can be transparent, just so you can see them, I'm going to add a background color. And the same way with Sketch, I can have these smart guides, right? I can even have the distances. So with this, you can't say no to pixel perfection. I mean, this is the perfect tool. It's going to allow you to basically, just move things around until they respect the design guideline. And then I can create the connections between two screens. So I want this user button to show this screen. I'm going to do a control drag like this to here. And then I release, and I'm going to click on modal. So I have the modal segue, and the modal segue allows me to have a bunch of transitions between them, such as the slide up, the page, actually, never mind, that's the other one. The slide up, which is the cover vertical, the flip, which is kind of like that 3D effect, the cross dissolve, which is kind of like a fade in, and then the partial curve is kind of like ugly page turning effect that nobody uses. So let's do that because we love that effect. Let's give it a try. This is our first app. Let's give it a try. I can select the different iOS simulator. And I can set the scaling. And there you go. That amazing page turning effect is in my app. And of course, I can decide kind of like a back button. So I'm going to set that button. And just segue it back to the other screen. That's your first app. It's pretty impressive. Okay, so that's as quickly as I could show how to do a simple prototype and very easy transitions. Of course, there's a lot more to learn, and I definitely encourage you guys to kind of explore what's going on with this. We have about 5 minutes, well, 10 minutes. I want to show you a little bit about auto layout before we go. And the other thing is, you know, I guess before we finish with this, I can show you a little bit about kind of recreating the same steps that you did with Sketch. So remember the steps that we went through, right? I'm going to import my images like I did with Sketch. And I'm going to recreate the steps that I did in Sketch. As a designer, you've done it multiple times, so this should be fairly easy. Did I import it? Should be here. Yeah, it's here. So doing my image first, setting the size. By the way, we're working in points in Sketch, in Xcode, so that means that you have to divide everything by 2 if you're working at 2x. You know, I can change a bunch of stuff, such as the image mode. I can even do the blurry layer here in Xcode. So we designer, we love to use this kind of drag and drop interface. That's what we do in Sketch. That's how we should be designing in Xcode as well. The only difference is Xcode is so bloated, if you will, that it takes someone to kind of teach you how to use it. And once you're past that few hours of using Xcode, believe me, it's like super easy afterwards. So yeah, you know, I have my interface, I have my dialogue, I have my blur background. Let's give it a try. You know, there you go. You have a dynamic layer that sits on top of the background with the dialogue. But now, let's say I want this UI to represent well for multiple resolutions, for multiple phones. So what do I do? First of all, there's this very neat feature in Xcode that allows you to have an assistant editor. The assistant editor allows you to code side by side with your UI and connect to the class. But today, I don't have time to show you that. I want to show you how to at least preview your design in real time for multiple phones. In this case, I have the iPhone 4-inch. I can add another one for the iPhone 6 and the iPhone 5.5, which is the iPhone 6 Plus. So as you can see, my design is not working. And that's a problem. Now I have to turn on auto layout. Well, it kind of broke my design, but yeah, the screen is very small. So I have my screen, and I have a bunch of layers. Unfortunately, if you turn on auto layout, you need to use auto layout. You have to have it enabled. You have to apply the auto layout in order to see it in your interface. That's why I had to turn it off first, so that you wouldn't be confused with the concept. But once you have auto layout, let me just restart from scratch because it's kind of confusing at this point. So this is a blank canvas. I'm going to drag and drop, let's say, a rectangle. Very hard to use to design in a very small screen. So 0, 0. Yep.
You can try the 7 to 20B.
It's okay, I'm almost done. So I have my beautiful pink background. And the idea is to make it seem like it's going to, fill the whole screen for every single device. So what I need to do is just go to my auto layout and just do reset to suggested constraint, and it's going to fill all my devices. You can also decide to do it manually. So let's go to this rectangle here, clear constraint, and I can go to this, add new constraint, and I can set the distances between the canvas and the layer to 0, 0, and 0. Something is wrong because
you have to uncheck the use margins when you have constraints.
That gave me the Xcode 6, the margins.
okay.
So when you add the constraints itself, there is a...
Yeah, and there is the checkbox too.
Oh, constraint to margin. Okay, interesting.
Thanks, Xcode, it ruins everything.
There are some new stuff that happens, and you have to be able to work with. See, I'm working with a developer here, right? That's how you work with a developer. You try something, and then they're there, and they're like, hey, this is actually how you fix it. So constraint to margin 0, 0, 0, 0, and I do this, and it's going to fill on my screen for multiple devices. I can also decide to preview for the iPad and switch to landscape and portrait. It's going to work. So that's all I could show you guys today. I hope you found it useful enough to start playing with it. But most importantly, I hope you find it useful enough to want to collaborate more with your designer or your developer. Thank you.